In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen.
Cor Maria Immaculatum,
Ora pro nobis.
Sancte Joseph,
Ora pro nobis.
Sancte Gabriel Arcangele,
Ora pro
in
nobis.
nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. So today is Saint Gabriel the Archangel, and the feast of the Annunciation tomorrow, big huge feast. It's the day also of the traditional day of the crucifixion of our divine Lord. Therefore the feast of Saint who? The good thief?
Saint Jesus.
It's his feast day tomorrow. And it's also the day Archbishop Lefebvre died. It's the day also when Christ was ordained a priest. He was ordained in the womb of the Virgin Mary. The most beautiful basilica ever built. So that's the big day tomorrow. And so we'll have a high mass tomorrow night. And okay, let's continue with the study. So you noticed all these names, right? Abbot Harrigan, Castle, Father Augustine Bea, Romano Giordani, Gardini, Karl Rahner, Joseph Jungmann, Pius Parsk, Annibale Bonini, and you can add in there Yves Congar and von Balthasar. These say it what it is. These rats were in the liturgical commission in the 40s, and 20 years later they're going to be at the council pushing all the liberalism. And then Cardinal Mueller just recently came out in Rome. Cardinal Mueller, wherever he is, he's trying to say the abuses was not at Vatican II, it was the misinterpretation of Vatican II. But the abuses are built right into Vatican II, as we saw in the last book. You know, the contradictions, right? Anyone remember a blaring contradiction right in the text of Vatican II?
That us and Muslims worship the same God.
I mean, affecting the Mass,
The man.
affecting the liturgical revolution.
That Latin is to remain the language of the church, but the bishops may use the vernacular where they see fit.
Yeah, huge time bomb. Also, another one, keep the traditional ritual, but the bishops, if they see fit, can use enculturation and adopt even music and ceremonies that are specific to the given culture of a place. So if you're in the downtown St. Louis, well, have the rock and roll church, which they actually did. St. Alphonsus Church is a beautiful church, stone, built for the Tridentine Mass, and if it's still there today and not sold yet, they were always having the rock and roll Mass in there. And that's from Vatican II. So all these records were in the 40s are working here. Okay, feelings ran high both sides of the divide on the instructions of Cardinal Initzer of Austria. Karl Rahner, then in Vienna, wrote a 53-page letter of protest to Archbishop Grober, a copy of what was sent to all the German and Austrian bishops. So Archbishop Grober, God bless him, is raising his voice against all these progressive innovations. And then all the modernists are jumping on him. You're backwards. You're behind the time. Get with it. All right, next paragraph. Michael, Father Romano Gardini.
Father Romano Gardini also attempted to counter Archbishop Grober's criticism of the liturgical movement in a letter to Bishop Storr of Mainz. He was head of the German Liturgical Commission. This organization had been set up in 1940 independently of the Holy See. It provided a vehicle for communication among the leading members of the German liturgical movement, and a common front against attacks on the movement. In spite of opposition from more traditional quarters, Cardinal Bertram hoped to put pressure on Pius XII to authorize these reforms, and, as events have shown, his hopes were not entirely forlorn. He received an immediate reply from the Vatican permitting the High Mass, Decus Occam, to be sung in German by the congregation. So what had been illicitly done in defiance of canon law up to 1943 was suddenly transformed into an approved practice.
Okay, so you see the trend here? I mean, the church, we saw those codes, right? The Code of Canon Law, which forbade just anybody singing at Mass. Remember?
Yes.
Canon 1264, number 1, liturgical laws pertaining to sacred music must be observed. Pius X, the language proper to the Roman Church is Latin, hence it is forbidden to sing anything whatsoever in the vernacular in solemn liturgical functions. All right, and now suddenly they're singing all these German hymns, and it's approved by the Pius XII. So what do the liberals learn? They learn if they push hard enough, disobey just barely enough, the Pope will give in. And that's Pius XII, who was a good Pope.
It was the same principle under which Pope Paul VI would capitulate to pressure for communion in the hand, Mass facing the people, laicization of priests, etc. Regulations were being widely flouted, so why bother trying to maintain the rules? As for other demands, the following concessions were readily made. 1. The Holy See approved the dialogue Mass and left the vernacularized community Mass to the discretion of the German bishops. 2. A German language ritual was approved.
So that means at baptisms they would use German, at confirmations they would use German, at extreme unction they would use German. So this was also revolutionary. No longer the Latin for the sacraments. And then 3rd,
Father Augustin Bea was appointed to oversee the production of a new, non-traditional Psalter, which Pius XII personally approved in 1945.
yeah, that's the Bea Psalter. Remember we looked at some of that Latin?
Yes.
Horrible, just horrible. What a waste of time and what a waste of money, because they made some beautiful breviaries out of this, but horrible Latin. I mean, I think somehow the devil got Pius XII distracted with this, and he didn't. Again, all he had to do was consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. If he did, you know where we would be? We'd be in the triumph of the Immaculate Heart right now. You realize that? If Pius XII did what heaven tried to wring his neck and smack his bottom to do, and he didn't do it, we would be right now in the age of Mary. Vatican II would not have taken place. It would be a true revival and conversion. But he didn't do it, Pius XI didn't do it, and of course, forget the rest of them. You know? But the saying goes, we get the leaders we deserve. So I guess the world didn't deserve to have the Pope do it. It kind of goes both ways, right? Go on.
The reform of the Easter Vigil would soon be granted. The traditional ceremonies were drastically curtailed, and an opportunity for active participation was provided by a complete innovation. The, quote, renewal of baptismal promises recited in vernacular.
Right in the middle of the ceremony, right before Mass, they do in the vernacular, now that the Lenten training is over, let us renew our baptismal vows. Do you renounce Satan? I do renounce him. Right in the middle of Mass, English, everybody responding. Now let's pray together the Our Father. Our Father, who art in heaven. It's all smacks of the new Mass. And that's what Bonini had in mind, right? Also, to repeat again, in the Holy Saturday Easter Vigil, the priest is not in the back at the font blessing the holy water. He has a table in front of him, and he's facing the people on the epistle side, and he's blessing the holy water. So how's that for introducing a table? First time in the history of the church, the priest is facing the congregation with a table in front of him, blessing the holy water. That's in the Easter Vigil of 55. So, Father Bea's liturgical experiment, Anthony.
In 1945, Pope Pius XII approved for use in the divine office a new Latin version of the Psalms, the work of a committee of experts at the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome under the direction of Father Bea, S.J.
What's S.J.?
Society of Jesus.
Which is the?
Jesuits.
Go on.
The committee made a complete break with tradition by discarding the biblical and liturgical Latin, which had been used in the church since early Christian times. In its place, they used a form of classical Latin borrowed from the humanistic tradition of the ancient Romans, which had a different connotation. Even its rhythm was unfit for Catholic purposes, as it could not be easily sung to Gregorian chant. This innovation introduced by Pius XII could not be regarded as an example of the hermeneutic of continuity. Rather, we should call it the beatification of the Psalter.
Oh, yes.
This did not, however, satisfy the German bishops. At the request of the German Episcopal Conference, Father Romano Guardini produced a new Psalter in the vernacular.
What year?
In 1950.
Yeah, so in the vernacular, in German in his case. So this Father Bea Psalter was, I repeat, what a waste of paper, time. And you know how much time had to be put into going over each verse of the Latin and then the hymns? I mean, it's incomprehensible the hours that were put into this. And it all was a waste of time. Total waste of time. So that by the time, less than 10 years after, the priests are begging Pope John the 23rd, please can we use the Psalter we always used to use? Because this Bea Psalter, it doesn't work. It's cacophonic. It doesn't flow. It's not rhythmic like the Septuagint. And it was actually one of the few good things John the 23rd did was say, okay, yeah, go ahead, go back to the Old Latin. I think Bea was also, I think the Masons were they were already disrupting the priesthood. You see, because what is the closest thing to the priest in his life? Mass and breviary. Those are the most intimate things with God that he touches and lives in and prays every day. And you just throw in a wrench into the rhythm of the Psalms that he's prayed all his life. And now he's praying these jagged, unharmonious Psalms thanks to this Father Bea, Cardinal Bea to be. And it must have frustrated many priests. Just frustrated them, you know. So they were early in attacking the priesthood, you know, getting them used to change. And then a lot of priests just left. They just left. They just saw everything's changing and I can't keep up. And what's Rome going to do next? So the devil was hard at work. And none of this would have happened if Pius XII did what?
Consecrated to the Immaculate Heart.
Yes, it was that simple. Yeah.
Father, do you know if Bea changed the Psalms in the Roman breviary, or did that also affect the monastic breviaries?
No, monastic breviaries were untouched.
Oh.
But the Roman breviary, because you can't sing those, no monastery can sing that
Yeah.
that crazy Latin.
Yeah.
I mean, it's correct grammatically, but it doesn't flow. It just doesn't flow. It would be like changing the Our Father that you know since childhood, right? Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Changing it to, Our Father, may your name be sanctified in the heavens where you dwell. I mean, it's saying the same thing, but why change it?
Yes.
And that's what they did to the breviary, and it just... I can see why priests would be terribly disturbed, to say the least. So Bea, I think he was probably a Mason, or certainly friends with the Masons. Because it was Cardinal Bea who went, I'm pretty sure it was him, yes, that went to the B'nai B'rith in New York City, the high-up Judeo-Masons, and said, what do you want from the council? This is before Vatican II. They said, give us religious liberty. Give us religious liberty. They knew what they were saying, because by religious liberty they could overthrow the whole social kingship of Christ, overthrow the Catholic Church, and bring in the destruction of the Catholic Church, which is what happened. And Cardinal Bea, he came back waving the flags for religious liberty. And that's why, Bishop Fillet, what he said was a huge scandal back in 2012, and he's never corrected it. He's never condemned what he said, and he has a duty to do this before he dies, which is he has to take back his words, the religious liberty of Vatican II was very limited, very limited. In other words, it wasn't so bad, but it was bad. The Archbishop wrote whole books on it. All right, Pius XII sides with the reformers against the traditionalists. Pius XII sides with the reformers against the traditionalists. Now, this is shocking to many people, but history shows it. Go ahead. Who's up? Gabriel?
The year 1943 will go down in history as the moment in which the Church, at last, gave in to the zeitgeist, or spirit, of progressivism that had been threatening to engulf her since Pius X's time. The German bishops were demanding the freedom to do their own thing, and so the authority of the Roman Pontiff and the sacredness of the traditional liturgy had to be set aside to accommodate a changing and worldly liturgy that would enshrine the cult of man. Let us not forget about the impact of the Pope's concessions on the traditionally minded Catholics of Germany. The already disappearing rug was pulled from under their feet as they found themselves disavowed by their Holy Father.
Fishing in dangerous waters. Go on.
The whole enterprise was an ecclesiastical disaster in the making. The Pope tried to control the German Episcopal Conference by reprimanding liturgical abuses and imposing shambolic restrictions, conditions, and experimental periods. But the German bishops tossed them all aside to indulge in unlimited freedom to regulate their own liturgies. It is obvious that the gestures made by the Pope against dissident reformers, while tolerating their abuses, was totally illogical. The message was fatally mixed.
Okay, who's a seminarian at this time?
Cardinal Ratzinger.
Cardinal Ratzinger. So he's in the middle of all this. And maybe in the seminary they're already experimenting with the new mass, facing the people, putting in German, singing German songs. You see? So you got a modernist formed right from his seminary days. He becomes Pope. He thinks it's all great. So that's why, the sedevacantists don't take that into account. To be a heretic, you have to be a formal, knowing heretic. But if you and I were formed in this modernism, we would think, well, it's the Holy Spirit moving the church. We wouldn't be heretical at all in our thinking. We would think it's just, this is how the church evolves. You see? So am I a formal heretic if I really believe I'm Catholic and think this way? I'm not. But that's how slippery and gross and cunning modernism is. That you can think you're Catholic and you're just not. And that's the same with John Paul II, because he was formed the same way. These modernists. So it's not objectively fair to say they're absolutely formal heretics. Only God knows, but I'm just making this point because, anyway, go on.
If infringing upon canon law and disobeying papal commands can be so easily tolerated in Germany, why should progressivists elsewhere be targeted for papal criticism? And if using the vernacular in the German-speaking lands was widely permitted, why should the inhabitants of other nations be prevented from using their own languages in the liturgy?
Yeah, so you see, he put a trend that was very deadly. Go on.
Even though Latin remained, quote-unquote, officially the language of the liturgy, the situation quickly descended into
Farcical.
chaos. There followed a concerted effort in the 1940s to storm the Vatican. Overwhelmed with requests from many countries, Pius XII increased permission for the use of the vernacular in their liturgy.
Footnote, vernacular versions of the ritual were permitted in the Vatican in Germany, 1943 and 1950, in France, 1946 and 1947, in the USA, 1954. So I know some society priests who used this one, 1954, the English method of doing baptisms. And I know some priests do it. They use it. At Liège, 1948 and 1949, permission was granted to China for the Mass in Chinese. And that's 1949. In 1950, India received permission to use Hindi for the celebration of the sacraments. So was Vatican II really all that radical when you consider all this was going on under Pius XII? Right? Go on.
For those who decided to short-circuit the system and not bother to ask permission, no action would be taken against them for breaking the law. The same scenario would be repeated after Vatican II, with permission for altar girls, communion under both kinds, etc., when popes rewarded disobedience and encouraged contempt of ecclesiastical law.
That's right. Those who disobey for a long time, they get the blessing. They get approval. It was a terrible trend Pius XII started to set, quite honestly. And, I admire Pius XII. He was a truly great pope and doctrinally sound. But I think he got blinded and lost many graces. I repeat, because he didn't obey the Virgin of Fatima. A French and German pincer movement, Pius XII under siege. The 1940s were also a time when national hierarchies, particularly the French and German, were rallying their combined forces to mount an all-out assault on Roman control of liturgy. This just finishes. It may seem to some people surprising or a trifle hyperbolic that the language of battle should be employed to characterize the situation, but it cannot be denied that the pre-Vatican II reformers saw their mission in these terms.
Sorry, Father, you can keep on going. I got confused with the time.
One of Dom Baudouin's companions in arms, Father P. Duployer, stated in 1941, after attending the first International Liturgical Week at the German Benedictine Abbey of Maria-Laach, said, this is Dom Baudouin's companion, Father P. Duployer, if they knew in Rome that Paris and Trier, which were the centers of the French and German reformist movements, were marching together, that would be the end of the hegemony of the Congregation of Rites. So they were acting pretty sneakily as well. These are certainly fighting words revealing the intention of the liturgical movement to wrest control of the liturgy from the Holy See. Yet they were not matched by any joint action or correspondingly militant spirit of opposition from the Vatican. There was no one there to fight the battles that needed to be fought. Faced with mounting pressure from the leaders of various liturgical cabals, Pius XII would blow an uncertain trumpet in mediator Dei and follow a policy of appeasement. Quoting 1 Corinthians 14:8, "For if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself to the battle?" Right? There's a certain melody the trumpet plays, get ready for battle. But if it doesn't, it partly plays that melody, but partly doesn't, everyone's confused. And that's what Pius XII was doing. And I'll tell you the truth, if Cardinal Mary Delval, who was the right-hand man of Pius X, he should have been the next pope. But he was ousted because he was so traditional. And they didn't want Pius X anymore. And Benedict XV would get rid of all his, much of what he set up to keep modernism out of the parishes. Benedict XV took down. He was the nice guy, making up for the mean pope. But had Cardinal Mary Delval been pope, things would have been very different. Definitely different. And there would have been a fight to maintain Pius X's liturgical defense of the Mass. Chapter 7, Pius XII, the appeasement process, feeding the German crocodile. Michael?
The British statesman Sir Winston Churchill
Louder.
once famously remarked with reference to the German Chancellor that appeasement is tantamount to feeding a crocodile in the hope that it will eat you last. All the evidence gleaned from the history of the liturgy in the 1940s indicates that papal authority was in ignominious retreat before the aggression of the German liturgists, whose goals lay far beyond the limits of any reasonable accommodation. The seriousness of the German bishops' 1943 challenge can be seen as the first of a series of challenges, each one of which carried with it an extra nail in the coffin of Catholic tradition, culminating in the reforms of Vatican II. For what they were contemplating were changes in the millennial rites, starting with the Easter Vigil, to adapt them to the spirit of modern times. The loss of Latin and the destruction of the treasury of sacred music were also part and parcel of the whole plan. Dom Baudouin's plan, see chapter 3, were well on the way to gaining official recognition in the church.
Okay, so quick flashback to chapter 3. Remember Baudouin, his goals were adoration of the reserved Blessed Sacrament is not a divine institution. Christ did not say, adore this in memory of me outside the action of the Mass. Those who adore the Blessed Sacrament outside Mass have given sustenance to individual piety to the detriment of the collective unity of the Eucharist. In other words, put the Blessed Sacrament tabernacle on the side. It's not the center. This worship of the God of the tabernacle is a true heresy, said Baudouin. What a heretic. Our Lord might be infinitely adorable, but he did not come to be adored, but to adore the Father with us and for us. And then the faithful adore the Blessed Sacrament because it has to be reserved, but it is not reserved so that they must adore it. He had a real edge against the Blessed Sacrament, didn't he? He must have been a creep. A real creep, because a priest who doesn't love the Blessed Sacrament, I don't know what he is, but he's a monster. He's not a priest, a priestly heart. And then all these other spirit of egalitarianism, calling outdated all the use of silence in the Mass and all that. Museum pieces, dried up husks. That's Baudouin. He was a real avant-garde modernist, progressive. And he had a huge influence on Ratzinger and all these liturgical wreckers, right? Go on, Michael.
Confronted with an increasingly menacing international situation of anti-Roman hostility and wishing to avoid open conflict, Pope Pius XII adopted a conciliatory approach to the demands of liturgical reformers. His message to the German Episcopal Conference in 1943 was tantamount to saying, "Continue breaking liturgical law, and the Holy See will reward you with its prize of papal approval."
Yes, so, Pius XII, he didn't like open conflict, so he probably, in his eyes, was just, okay, we'll allow this in this certain place, we'll tolerate this, not realizing that he's up against an army of devils who aren't going to just rest with a little bit of crumbs that he gives them. They're out to destroy, right? But Pius XII didn't see it because he didn't.
That's a great
Russia
question.
to the macaroni.
I really think that's what it boils down to. He came out as Pope saying in the beginning, he's the Pope of Fatima. But in the end, he ended up shutting down much of Fatima. Literally, silencing Sister Lucia. All right, Anthony?
It must be admitted that an overwhelming preponderance of evidence pointed to the futility of appeasement well before this date. With the rise of the liturgical movement in the Benedictine Abbey of Maria Laach in Germany in 1914, and the pioneering work of Father Pius Parsch in Austria in 1918, liturgical anarchy and ecumenical contacts were flourishing with impunity in the German-speaking lands. No amount of concessionary favors from the Holy See could have assuaged the hunger of the beast of reform. The German crocodile was not content with a few scraps thrown in its direction. As everyone knows, crocodilians are predators with insatiable appetites.
That's right. They're going to eat everything you feed them, and they're going to eat you too. Mediator Dei, a compromise document. Go on.
A careful reading shows that Mediator Dei, 1947, is a political document which takes both sides of the debate so that reformers and traditionalists can find support for their point of view and argue endlessly over which side best represents the thinking of the Pope. It is true that Pius XII reprimanded various liturgical abuses, but in the same document he also gave the reformers room to move, to make progress on their agenda of active participation. Most dismayingly of all for traditionalists, he praised the party of reform and demonstrated his commitment to the liturgical movement with these words.
Quote,
"The movement owed its rise to commendable private initiative, and more particularly to the zealous and persistent labor of several monasteries within the distinguished order of Saint Benedict.
That's right from Mediator Dei, paragraph 4. And
We derive no little satisfaction from the wholesome results of the movement just described," end quote.
all right, so he's praising the liturgical movement, and it's all these modernists. And it is true. In the field of in the ball field of tradition, you do have traditionalists who don't want the dialogue mass, they don't like it, and they quote Mediator Dei. But then you get people who are very pro dialogue mass, and they also quote Mediator Dei. You see, Pius XII allows it, right? And I'm to blame myself. I went to Nickelville, St. Teresa's, and Father Lafitte had established there the dialogue mass. And I was there 7 years, and that's what they did. And I didn't put an end to it. I should have put an end to it. But I was of the thinking, well, Pius XII approved it. So, well, we can't really, I don't like it so much. And I'm also to blame for allowing, when the priest turns around and says, Ecce agnus Dei, ecce qui tollit peccata mundi, Bishop Follet told us in a retreat for priests, it's the faithful that should be saying Domine non sum dignus 3 times instead of the priest. So I went along with that too. So here I am, a traditional priest, and I thought I was fully traditional. And here I was, I was just saying, well, this is the society's position. Archbishop Lefebvre accepted it, and the popes approved it, Pius XII. But you see, it's the same document. Mediator Dei, you could quote in favor of dialogue mass, but you can also quote it against a dialogue mass. So it is true here what this author is saying. Pius XII, appeased both sides. But feeding this German crocodile of the liturgical wreckers, it ate everything he gave them, but it ate the church in digesting it. Not that the church will ever end, but so I do regret that, and I would appeal to Saint Teresa's. Why don't you just go back to the old mass, where the congregation follows in silence and praise it instead of blah blah blah. So yeah, I am at fault with that. But I didn't know. I really didn't know. I didn't do enough research. And quite honestly, we didn't have these books that go into the history of it so deep and show the actual documents. So we were all kind of ignorant of that. But now, in hindsight, I'm happily never going to do the dialogue mass ever again. At least according to my will. Because in some of our missions even, I tell them, look, this is not a dialogue mass, only the altar boy responds. In Troy Oratory Day, and everybody, Adeum Qualificat, even to the ma'am. But it's the South Americans, they're soaked in the dialogue. So were the Germans, so were the French. It's in their system since the 20s and 30s. So it's hard to get it out of them. It really is. I haven't been successful yet, but anyway, yes.
It's interesting because the way Pius XII, when he talks about the liturgical movement, it sounds like the way some people talk about Vatican II. They condemn what they say are abuses, but they say that Vatican II, though, had a good spirit, because he's condemning abuses in the liturgical movement, but he says the liturgical movement itself is still condemned.
Yes. That's why I say Vatican II didn't just explode out of the air. You can see it was in the workings, right? It really was. Misplaced praise for a misbegotten movement. What, Gabriel? Loud and clear.
But what was the outcome really so splendid? And were the liturgical leaders so admirable? To answer yes would be historically inaccurate and intellectually incoherent. By 1947, the new breed of biblical scholars, theologians, and liturgists had been engaged in liturgical experimentation on their own initiative for decades.
So, 1947, they've been disobeying Rome, disobeying the laws of the church. And then suddenly they get approval. So what does that tell you? Right? The modernists think, hey, this is right. We can push forward our ideas and the church will evolve. It supported their evolution of dogma. Go on.
They had also succeeded, largely unmolested by ecclesiastical hierarchy, in propagating their revolutionary agenda in books, reviews, lectures, liturgical centers, study weeks, and conferences. And it was from the Benedictine monasteries that these new ideas first spread to country after country around the world, with the towering figure of Dom Lambert Baudouin presiding over the movement like a brooding colossus.
Footnote, the reference is to the massive 16th century Italian sculpture known as the Colosso dell'Apennino on the Apennine Colossus, created by the artist Giambologna. The giant statue sits brooding over a pool, staring into its murky depths like a malevolent spirit. Its body contains a number of interconnecting chambers, while inside its head there is a sort of fireplace which, when lighted, emits billows of smoke from its nose. So there's Dom Lambert, he's like the hero of the whole liturgical wreckage movement. And they all love him. They all think he's great. And I'm sure they're laughing among themselves. We've been at it for years. Rome didn't like it. We were breaking the rules. But see, the Pope approved us now. It all paid off. Pius XII goes on.
Pius XII seemed to be suggesting that the liturgical movement, purged of its abuses, was praiseworthy. That is the same argument used today in relation to the Novus Ordo, where there could be no good outcomes, no so-called wholesome results from reforms that were not rooted in the faith and tradition of the Church. Besides, it is only the merest fancy that there existed a liturgical movement before Baudouin appeared on the scene to claim that he was fulfilling the aims of Pope Pius X. Wherever the Catholic faith flourished, this was due to sound catechesis and the correct spirit and practice of the liturgy as taught by Pope Pius X, who never considered himself part of anyone's movement.
If we join the dots, the full picture emerges. There is a general reluctance among traditionalists to acknowledge that the liturgical reforms of Pius XII are part of a continuum from the inception of the liturgical movement in 1909 at the Benedictine Abbey of Mont César to the creation of the Novus Ordo 60 years later. Yet these were the words of Paul VI when he promulgated the new Mass April 3, 1969. Quote, "It was felt necessary to revive and enrich the formulae of the Roman Missal. The first stage of such a reform was the work of our predecessor, Pius XII, with the reform of the Easter Vigil and the rites of Holy Week, which constituted the first step in the adaptation of the Roman Missal to the contemporary way of thinking." Now, isn't that telling? So he refers to Pius XII as, thanks to him, we're able to overthrow the Mass. You follow there?
Yes.
You want to mark that quote too. It is not without significance that a future abbot primate of the Benedictine order, Dom Rambert, Weekland, who inherited the avant-garde or progressive liberal ideas of Baudouin's liturgical movement, would be one of Paul VI's personal consultors with regard to the Novus Ordo. So, Rembrandt Weekland. In his memoirs, Weekland explained how he was a protege, the disciple of Bonini, who assured him of Pope Paul's high regard for him. This demonstrates that the official reforms of Pius XII, no less than those of Paul VI, were tarred with the same brush, tainted from their Benedictine sources. It follows that Pacelli, that's Pius XII, and Montini, Paul VI, must bear the ultimate responsibility, each in his own way, for the unprecedented changes to the Roman Rite that they signed into law. So, we have to be honest. If, objectively speaking, Pius XII prepared for the new Mass. I don't think he realized, I don't think he had the malice that the other wreckers did. But objectively speaking, you have to say that. Who says it? Paul VI himself. Thanks to Pius XII that we're able to overthrow the Mass. You follow?
Yes.
It's disappointing because everybody loves Pius XII. And, but I don't think he certainly never had the malice that these other wreckers did. But he would have been protected from these mistakes if he had
Consecrated Russia to the Immaculate Heart.
Agitorium nostrum in nomine Domini.